I have shared this introduction, and that introduction is normally on Sunday you will see me pull out a little folder with notes in it. And I have a folder with notes for the homily for two reasons. One, to keep me on track, and two, to give you hope that there's a foreseeable end to the homily. You know, I don't have any notes this evening. Uh-oh. Good luck. No, I won't keep you, I promise. But a couple thoughts to share. First thought is really more of an observation. If you recall at the very beginning of Mass, I commented that, of course, our nation is under the patronage of our Blessed Mother, particularly under the patronage of the Immaculate Conception. And if you think for a moment, the center of power of the nation, I suppose we would agree, is Washington, D.C., where decisions are made. What two states surround Washington, D.C.? Maryland and Virginia, right? Maryland and Virginia. Mispronounce that for a moment. Maryland, M-A-R-Y-L-A-N-D, and Virgin. It's an interesting little observation that I don't think is merely a coincidence that a nation whose patronage is under Mary, the two very states that border the center of government, has the actual name Mary right there, and her call of virginity. And so perhaps this feast is a day for us to really call ourselves to pray for the nation, as we will after Mass. We have adoration here in church for the respect for life, for the dignity of life in our nation. And that'll go to 11 at night. We invite you to stay a few minutes or stay a few hours to pray. It's a really beautiful day to pray for the nation. And as we look at the readings and celebrate the Immaculate Conception, of course, the very first reading, we are reminded from the book of Genesis how sin entered into the world. Sin entered into the world through Eve saying yes to the deception of the serpent to eat of the fruit. And I've told you many a times from this pulpit, if a serpent or snake starts to speak to you in the garden, seek competent help quickly, and certainly don't engage it in conversation. But Eve, for some reason, did. And, of course, she violated God's teaching. And, of course, Adam, not free of sin in all of this, not only because he ate the fruit as well, but he really was not about his responsibility of protecting his wife. And so in the very first reading, we hear about that entry of sin into the world. And, of course, with the Immaculate Conception, we have the entry of redemption into the world. It's through Mary, the new Eve, and her yes, that the call of redemption took place. Her yes allowing Jesus to be born. Her yes in cooperation with God's will, undoing what Eve had done, and becoming the mother of us all, as Deacon Greg reminded us in the penitential rite at the foot of the cross. And what do we really learn from Mary? Some very basic points today, some very basic reminders. We hear Mary, and we know that Mary is visited by the angel. And as Mary is visited by the angel, what does the angel say? Do not be afraid. We hear that several times throughout the Scripture, but here today in particular, do not be afraid. And I think we all need to be reminded not to be afraid. If you watch the 6 o'clock or 11 o'clock news, there's a lot of things to be afraid about. The recent shooting on the campus in Las Vegas, one of the young students who was interviewed said, "Every day I come to school and I'm afraid." Exact words. Maybe we sometimes have similar fears as we're out in public. And certainly maybe at times we have fear simply over living our faith and perhaps being questioned why we believe or why we celebrate the faith. We might be a little afraid to speak the truth. What if those in our circle do not accept it? And we're told, do not be afraid. So Mary reminds us, whatever those fears are, to try to put them aside. And we're reminded not to be afraid. And then we're given real hope, more important hope than me having a folder with notes, real hope. And what is the real hope? We hear very clearly to say that nothing is impossible with God. Nothing is impossible with God. And it's really almost maybe a mantra we should have each and every day of our life. Maybe times we get a little overwhelmed. Maybe we're overwhelmed for very important reasons. So there's an illness in our own life or a loved one, or time of separation or divorce, or whatever the issue may be, we may get overwhelmed. And when we have that overwhelming feeling, we have to remember those words that nothing is impossible with God. As long as we follow the third point of what Mary teaches us, her yes to doing the will of the Lord, as long as we say yes to doing the will of the Lord and put down our own will, well then we'll probably realize in a greater way how God's plan will come to fruition and see that nothing really is impossible as long as we allow God's will to prevail. And how often we probably, put our will over the Lord's. How often we put the will of someone else maybe over the Lord's. How often we put maybe the will of relativism or modern thought over the way of the Lord and the gospel. And so we look to Mary today to be able to do the Lord's will, and in so doing see that nothing at all is impossible. And as we see nothing is impossible, I believe it'll eliminate all fear from our lives. Something to think about this beautiful night.